Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Just wanna. Okay, great. Welcome to our community conversation with the Equality Fund. This is my first. My name is Sana Mustafa. I am the new Associate Vice President of Philanthropy, and I'm taking care of this department for Vidya as she's taking care of her new baby. We say congratulations to her. I believe many of you here because you're very familiar with our community. And so thank you for welcoming me and thank you for giving me a chance to be part of this community. I come just a little bit more about me. I come from, I'm a feminist Syrian refugee. I have been in the US for the last 12 years and I've been working on the rights and advocacy of forcibly displaced persons with the Feminist Foundation and Feminist Lens. And I'm very thrilled to be here, joining now the Equality Fund on this movement and joining all of you and getting to know you. And these conversations have always come in the right moment. And this moment today, we are meeting really, as we all know and experience it, in a huge global uncertainty. And when the things that we fought for and we built, all our movements across movements for the last decade, they feel like they're being taken away from us. But we all know that's not gonna happen. We never let it happen. And so this is really a moment for us to acknowledge the reality and also to acknowledge the efforts and the partnerships and the collaborations that are happening and really standing and resisting these devastating realities. So this conversation is really going to be about spotlighting the efforts that we're all doing in the movement and highlighting the partnerships that we have with the at the Equality Fund. And so we have with us my partners and my colleagues from the Equality Fund, and we have with us also the Astraea Foundation, who is a peer founder of the LGBTQ rights movement and also is a grantee of ours for years now. And with that, I would like to introduce my colleagues who will be really kind of sharing with us today more information about this work and reviving us into and grounding us in the work of the feminist movement. And I will let them introduce themselves. So maybe we start with you, Jolene.
Thank you, Sana. So good to be here. I'm calling in from Toronto, what's currently and colonially known as Toronto. And I was just saying to Monica that we're often the people that are holding the pen. We're writing the stories. We're weaving the narratives of our phenomenal partners' impact. So it is just so good to be here in this more dynamic conversation. So thanks for having us.
Thanks, Jolene. Thanks, Sana. And very similar to what Jolene was sharing, and Nietzsche has also heard about this. Whenever I have the opportunity to be in conversation with our partners or other allies in the ecosystem, I often introduce myself as the person who has the privilege to read through all our partners' reporting. So thanks for having us and for creating a safe space to share more about our partners' journey.
Nish?
Hi, everyone. My name is Nish. I use they, them, and he, him pronouns. And when I think about community, this is exactly what I look forward to, having space to connect and think about how we build movements together and how we support movements. So it's a privilege to be here and with Astraea Foundation as the Associate Director for the International Fund. Looking forward to having this conversation with you, Jolene and Monica, and thank you for your support, Sana.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for being with us and for all those who joined us as well. And so let's start the conversation. I think we all know how hard this moment is, and it's very easy to feel disappointment and to feel anger and frustration, but how these are also tools for change. And so Jolene and Monica, you are the people at the Equality Fund who spend times and a lot of time really learning about our grantees partners' work and their strategies and their innovative solutions. So can you tell us what they're doing, our partners, now in response to this moment? Share with us, please, some of these stories.
Yeah, it's such a great opener. Thanks, Anna. you're right, it has been quite a time. There's on a global scale, there's been the systematic shrinking of official development assistance and funding flows. We're living through an unprecedented humanitarian systems reset. There's been an expansion of anti-rights movements, an entrenchment of authoritarian governments across the board, and escalation of multiple and multi-layered crises. We're also navigating, and we've seen kind of the introduction of more repressive and restrictive legislation that both impedes resource flows, but also the vilification of LGBTQI communities has intensified to new degrees. So yeah, there's no doubt that this is an incredibly challenging moment. And yet, feminist movements, they're responding to these headwinds with strategic foresight that is grounded in the collective and accumulated wisdom of communities, of generations that have resisted and lived through repression and scarcity. So I love this invitation to focus in on stories because they offer such an important counter narrative in this moment. And to really dial us into some context, for instance, in Kazakhstan, where it's extremely repressive right now, there's been a large-scale erosion of human rights. Our partners have been systematically targeted and arbitrarily arrested and detained for their human rights work. And what this does, this targeting and closure of civic space, it creates a chilling effect. It stops groups and activists from being more visible and vocal. And against this hostile backdrop, Kazakhstan Feminist Initiative, Feminita, a really small, unregistered, and scrappy, you could say, organization, they've continued to sustain their queer advocacy, despite members of parliament calling for them to be tagged and labeled extremists. They have seeded widespread political education through a human rights school and public lectures in community, and they have really tended to their people by hosting the first ever in the history of Central Asia, a lesbian convening. And they dubbed this the lesbian Kurultai. And that word is something that they reclaimed from traditional patriarchal language. A Kurultai is typically considered a big meeting of old men who sit together to discuss high-level issues. And it's a little cheeky, it's fun, it's feminist. And they held space for joy, for resistance, for solidarity and celebration to say, we're here, we're queer, and we will persevere. And this is despite pressure and scrutiny. The lease was terminated, the lights were turned off, and they were still able to host this 4-day event, function, celebration from start to finish. Such a moment of joy. We hear the vegan cake was very, very good. And they're also, it's not just deeply rooted in their local community, but they are making contributions to the field and to the global community. A couple of years ago, we put forward one of their co-leads names to sit on the advisory committee for the Dignity Network. And so they now serve there, they were taken up, and then they also serve on the advisories of many other funds in the ecosystem. So this continues to fuel hope and action. And I'll say, while it may seem that there's less room for movements to emerge or expand when things are feeling so adverse, there are important outliers to this notion. Strong and nimble initiatives, they're coming out of the most challenging contexts. One I'll spotlight is over the last 2 years, the Dalan Fund has emerged as an unstoppable force for good in the Central and Eastern European and Caucasus region. And all of what they do is making grants through a participatory movement-led process. All of their funds are core, and they came up and they mushroomed at a time when these foreign agent laws and anti-LGBTQ rights were under threat. And so it's intentional and in the face of these challenges. So I will say, despite the authoritarian shifts in regimes, despite the onslaught, they have been doing something that is incredible and is really shifting and making waves in the ecosystem. Perhaps I'll throw it to you, Monica.
Thanks, Jolene. So today I would like to speak about our partner, Fondo de Mujeres del Sur, which is a feminist fund that works regionally in South America. particularly in Argentina and Paraguay. This fund, partnership with the Equality Fund, began in 2023, around the same time that the far-right governments of these countries came to power. When I first read the report for this year, I realized that we were looking at an example of what a full spectrum of rollback on rights looks like. And I really felt overwhelmed to learn how this is affecting the most vulnerable groups and communities in these countries. Over the past years, gender equality has been undermined through a range of strategies, including budget cuts affecting the provision and access to sexual and reproductive health rights services in Argentina, gender-based violence services in Paraguay. Also, attempts at legal setbacks, such as the recent intent to eliminate the crime of femicide from the penal code in Argentina, harassment campaigns targeting feminist groups and organizations, the criminalization of social protests and the persecution of human rights defenders, the exacerbation of the economic inequality and continued efforts to dismantle labor rights. And finally, the promotion of extractivist policies, compromising land rights, and also contributing to increasing the cost of living for the most marginalized communities. So with all that, in this context, Fondo de Mujeres del Sur is prioritizing existing partnerships via grant renewals and intentionally not issuing new calls for proposals. Other strategies that we see include also the adaptation of the risk management plan to better respond to the digital, legal, and physical attacks their partners are facing. It is also relevant to notice that the Equality Fund grant has enabled more much needed in-person visits, one-by-one support, and increased offering of care and wellness strategies. Overall, these strategies have proven to be successful. Our partner has been able to quickly adapt its grant-making plans and prioritize the issues and populations affected by public funding cuts. At the same time, this partner decided to also strengthen one of its anchor programs focused on protecting environmental rights in response to the anti-rights actors' attacks on land rights in Argentina. This initiative includes ongoing efforts to foster a collective environmental knowledge in the region, as well as closely tracking the impact of the environmental defenders' work. Thinking about innovation, I can say that Fondo de Mujeres del Sur is going above and beyond, not only strengthening its networking with funds in the region, but also pursuing unusual cross-regional connections and exchanges. For example, with the African Women's Development Fund, they were working together on economic justice, and this is a proof that the language and geographical barriers can be put down to make it happen.
Yeah, thank you both so much. I think it's really evident from what you shared, what we already know is that feminist, women, and queer and LGBT-led movements, they know best what their communities need. And if anything, their default is responding to crisis and oppression. And so I always find that, like a bit ironic when, in the global south, we say innovation, and then the solution is literally the most local, organic solution, which is like, you're on the ground, you know exactly what you need to do, you have the proximity. And yet that, we can't frame it innovative. It's just because we're very far away from these issues. And so it's really refreshing to hear again how our communities and our partners and movement partners are responding. And I think we are the privileged here, right? We're in a privileged role as the Equality Fund to be able to resource this work and unlock funding for it. So really, I guess my next question would be, as movement funders, we're our intermediary and our donors are part of this. What can we and those who are also supporting us, supporting the Equality Fund, can do better and to accompany those local partners of us on this journey? How can we fund these movements at this moment better? What do you both think on that?
Super timely question, and hopefully really generative for everyone on the call as well. We spoke earlier about how this is a really challenging moment. For us at the EF, it's also been a really clarifying moment. It has prompted us to get real and clear about our purpose, our priorities, who our allies are, and what our assignment is to sustainably fund movements, to resource them so they can continue driving critical work in communities. What this does is it calls on EF to show up in solidarity and action at every level, to reimagine risk through an equity and justice lens, to consistently share and shift power. And core to this is our ecosystem approach, which is baked into our design and how we move. It's about meeting partners, movement partners where they're at, supporting different layers of feminist movements to activate different levers of change so that we can engage different levels of government and systems. And I'll say that taking an ecosystem approach is so critical also to making funding more accessible and reaching different groups that EF is perhaps not best positioned, like you said, in our Global North positioning, to reach or to garner trust or to move in a timely way with accountability. How does that saying go? If you want to go fast, you go alone. But if you want to go far, you move together. So part of our commitment then is investing in that connective tissue, in the relational infrastructure that brings people together, that binds and builds up feminist movements. And especially now, with that unrelenting backdrop of anti-rights and rollback on rights, we hear that connecting, that co-strategizing, especially in person, is so core to advancing the work and strengthening movements. And how this shows up for us is in our accompaniment and our care. It's integrated into all of the work that we do at a time when we're seeing, again, those administrations violently rolling back rights for LGBTQI persons, cutting crucial funding for feminist movements. The Equality Fund has paused to strategize and to recognize that healing work is feminist work. And we saw this one example is, a space that we dreamed up, we co-conspired with Astraea on the sidelines of UN CSW, which is the Commission for the Status of Women. And holding that space was a space of restoration, but also a space to, really knit together diverse partners across contexts and languages. Something else that we're really reckoning with is that transformative change requires trust-based funding practices. And what does that require of us to shift our reporting cadence, how we're creating new pathways for partners to speak about what is alive and present and shifting for them, and not feel the burden of having to report on a regular cadence. So just staying flexible, and also realizing that sometimes if you cannot fund more, you can fund core. And so core funding has been the unrestricted spaciousness to self-actualize, to be everything that you need to do to meet emerging priorities, to set your own agendas, to build up cross-movement alliances and take that time to advocate, is something that we're hoping that feminist movements can continue to do, to not just build up their previous blueprint, but to go well beyond. And it's not just us showing up support. We showed up by releasing top-ups in early advances, emergency funding in countries and contexts that were most heavily hit by the US aid cuts. But it's not just us. We're hearing from our partner funds as well, right? Like we heard from Reconstruction Women's Fund that 2024 was interestingly a year where they did amazing. They were successful. They saw the writing on the wall they were aware of, and they anticipated like a real shakeup of the philanthropy sector. And so in a year where they saw these trends, they were the most successful. They were able to award over 100 grants, the most in their reporting period, but also they've intentionally kind of shifted gears a little bit towards diversifying their funding pool, to unlocking, again, those unusual actors, finding folks who are aligned with their principles, but also perhaps bringing more people into the fold and talking through the, to people who are perhaps holding less popular kinds of money, but why it's important for you to be bought in and sustain movement. So really important to hear from a strategic standpoint what they've been up to.
Thanks, Jolene. And I would like to say that now that you were speaking about trusted funding practices, I was reflecting that we don't speak often about the quality of the funding and its positive impact on our partners navigating these complex situations. The Quality Fund provides flexible, long-term funding to partners, and this enables institutional strengthening investments, such as collective care, as you were mentioning. So I would like to bring one story. This year, our partner Concavis Trans in El Salvador shared that given the multiple risks and limitations that activists face in the country with the ongoing Bukele's administration, being able to access resources to promote the self-care of the team has been, and I'll quote, in fact, an act of resistance and political sustainability. This partner highlighted that the Quality Fund grant not only allowed them to implement programmatic activities, but also to invest in collective care to sustain the work of Concavis Trans day by day. Some examples of these include training focus on stress management, mental health, and team building activities. All these are key to preventing burnout in a work environment exposed to high levels of stress and structural violence. This is a reminder for us that holding the line is not only about the partners showing up, but also intentionally showing up at their best to the communities they serve.
I can't tell you more how happy I am you brought up this. In the moment of, this conversation is about urgency, and it's about crisis, and it's about darkness, and of course also opportunities and all of it. And it's so easy for us to feel like we want everyone to do more. We have to work more, and we want our partners to work more. And this is just promoting more burnout and more trauma and more survival. And what you said is that really what we need to do as funders and as movement partners is, if anything, to really resource rest, to resource healing. And I think this is a radical act and a radical message. And, it really reminds me of Audre Lorde's quote, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation. And that is a political act of warfare. And every time, I find myself slipping into the urgency, Western culture, I remind myself of that. And I think normalizing it is so important and critical. And I've always been in spaces where, donors see this as a huge luxury, and especially implementing partners, it's not even thought of. And so I'm really grateful for you to highlight how much we believe in this and the Equality Fund, and funding it is important. And also highlighting what does trust-based philanthropy mean, like such a big term. So like now it's kind of co-opted to an extent, and really sharing with us practically what it means. And when you can't fund more, then fund core. Love that quote, Julian. So really thank you both for bringing us up to here. And I want to hand back the conversation to you to bring Nish into the conversation. And we want to hear more about what also Astraea is doing as a peer partner and as a funder.
Thank you, Sana. Thanks, everyone. I'm really sitting and simmering with all of the things that have been shared. But most importantly, Nish, I want to bring you in because it is such a treat, such a true pleasure to have you with us. We've had a chance to engage and share space, and what you're doing and how Astraea is moving and how you're embedded in the ecosystem is truly living out everything that we've shared so far. So wondering, what is coming up for you what are you seeing and sensing in your network? And how is care coming through as a true strategy right now? How is coalition and alliance building important right now?
Oh, thank you so much. I almost forgot I was on the panel. I was so deeply riveted by the conversation that was happening. And also, I need that T-shirt that says, if you can't fund core, no, if you can't fund more, fund core. I need that T-shirt. So thank you for having me. When I think about, I love what Sana said in terms of we already know what movements are facing. We already know how critical this work is. So I'm not going to dive too much into what this disruption means, because I think all of us already know what's happening, and already know too that the movement also has the answers. And so when I think about this conversation, I think about care, coalition, and strategy work. And the word that stands out for a mixture of all of that is community. And it's a community of the movements, and it's also us being in community and partnership with each other within philanthropy. So I want to talk a little bit about those two things. And one of the ways that I see like stories coming out about practicing care and knowing that for Astraea, our commitment to care of our grantee partners is deeply embedded in our work. Healing, justice, and collective care are actually principles that we hold very dearly. And I just love the story you told, Jolene, about the opportunity to collaborate at CSW and how we do that in practice. And it's not just, as something that we say, but how we show up in this work every single day. And I do want to think, though, about how the crisis, and as you said, Jolene, the escalation of it and the multiple layers of it impact our grantee partners and our movements at the forefront of this work, or LGBTQ movement, migrant communities, women and girls especially. And Astraea, as a funder, we have an important role to play to try to mitigate some of that risk that our grantee partners are experiencing. And like you said as well, Julie, I'm going to quote you quite a lot because you had so much really good tips to say about reimagining risk. That is something that we have to think about, that we want to reimagine the risk, and not the risk that we're facing as funders, but actually the risk that our grantee partners are facing. And, when the funding cuts started escalating, one of the things that Astraea had to think about was, how do we communicate to our grantee partners in a way that reduces the harm, reduces the intensity of this moment, reduces their own uncertainty. So when folks were receiving letters just out of the blue from funders, we had to think about what is a way that we can show up in this global virtual world, which does really create a lot of barriers for how we communicate, with care. And so what Astraea did, and this was a process that was led by our vice president of programs, was to reach out to our grantee partners to have calls with every single one, whether it was in group calls, whether it was try to have a quick call on Signal. And this was important because there's already risk in that communication process. And because, there's surveillance happening, how do we shift that process to make it more, to humanize that process a little bit, and also hold space to see our community and to be in community with our grantee partners, and not just as a way of sharing information, because it's a two-way street. And one thing that for me was humbling and inspiring is that in one of the calls where we're sharing that we actually might not be able to give this grant out because it was a government grant, and we don't have the resources at this time to fulfill that obligation to our grantee partners. One of our grantee partners asked to us, how can we support you? What do you need in this moment? Let's take a deep breath. Let's hold space for this difficult conversation that I know is hard for you as well as a funder, because we are also parts of community. And I think sometimes that navigating being a part of community and being a funder is difficult, because we hold that responsibility, but also we also need community as well, even in those moments. So I think that was an important conversation to witness, and to see how how our grantee partners, again, show up, because it's not really innovation. They've been doing this for centuries. They've had to step into these moments. And one other reflection I want to share in terms of like, how does this then position us as funder and our relationships with each other? And I think what it means for me is that, how do we think about who are our partners in solidarity, and what does like that coalition building look like? And it means that we need to have like strategic conversations with other donors, with our peers, because support looks like showing up for each other in these moments. And I'm not only saying this because I'm talking with the Equality Fund, but I really do think that you all are such an important partner to us and have shown up for us time and time again. And an example of that is showing up when we can actually have that conversation about this is what we're facing with the loss of resources, and EF can say that, hey, we can provide this additional top-up as a recipient of a grant from the Equality Fund, but also as a peer, so that we can meet the moment and support our grantee partners and lessen the impact. And I'm happy that our ED at Astraea, Joy, and our Devo team led by Kate was able to really hold multiple conversations like this with other funders as well, to talk about what it means to loosen restrictions and fund core in ways that make sense. And so that's really our supportive peer partnership that is integral to the landscape that we're in at this moment.
Nish, thank you so much. I think what's coming through is the authentic way, the accountable way in which you and Astraea are showing up in this movement. I want to lift up just a couple of things. Again, what you said, that idea of feminist risk mitigation, so key, but also linked to what you said about the multi-directionality, the mutuality of these exchanges, right? It's not top down. We don't hold that info. Our movements have the answers and strategies, and echoing what Sana said as well. Monica, I'm sure you always sit with a bag of questions. You have that curiosity alive and well. So throwing to you if you have any questions to bring in as well into the conversation.
Thanks, Jolene, and thank you so much, Nit, for sharing those reflections. As you were already mentioning, I think this is front and center for our work, to always have these two ways of communication open, because we are really committed to learn with and from our partners. So as you look across the coalitions and care center strategies you have mentioned to us, what lessons are emerging about how funders can meaningfully show up in solidarity, especially when movements are navigating such intense external pressures?
Thanks for that question, Monica. Like, timely and really deep reflection that this calls for. And I think one of the things that comes up for me is what it means to have a long-term relationships as a core way to build trust, especially when the environment is so uncertain. Crisis, in terms of responding and partnership, it doesn't happen when the crisis is happening. It actually requires for meaningful partnerships across different movements as well, so that you're not siloing your issues and that you're actually showing up for support, even if this is not the core part of your own work. If it matters to your community and to what we look at as community, not the immediate community, but the wider ecosystem, then it means that deep belief then in collective power of community shows up in that way because of the meaningfulness and the long-term nature of the partnerships that you're trying to develop. And it also takes trust to navigate crisis. And that requires that type of long-term relationship building long before the crisis emerges. So if you're doing that, I think for me, it means that you're thinking about care and you're centering the needs of your movements as a key part of coalition building. And I also think that even if the crisis doesn't directly affect your organization, that is actually the time, especially when it doesn't affect your organization as directly, that is actually the time to step up and support movements who are facing those external pressures, because it means that you have a bit more bandwidth and you can show up for someone. And that reciprocity means that when you are facing something similar, movements who are not at the forefront of that can actually step up and hold you as well. And so that for me is what that looks like. And I think as well, going back to the flexibility of funding and what it means to have like practices of accompaniment that look at that type of flexibility, I think the best way that funders can show up for movements is actually, to, like you said, to provide that general operating core flexible funding, because that is actually what is life-saving for movements. It means that movements are able to pivot and respond in real time, and that they know that funders have their backs, and they know that funders are able to build that meaningful partnership with them that shows a deep understanding of their work and their context and the socio-political environment, and they don't have to explain. They don't have to justify why this shift is necessary, why they don't have to ask for permission. They don't have to try to, fit it into a M&E template to say, we're meeting 100, people here. We don't have to quantify it, right? Because we already, as feminist movements, we know that core flexible funding means that our grantee partner can shift resources from a project to salary if they need to. They can shift from a consultant to rent for a safe space if that's necessary. They can shift to increasing their digital security. And these are some things that require real-time, urgent responses. And the last reflection I'll share is that around how that ties into a process that is not extractive or performative engagement from philanthropy and from movements, because it actually acknowledges that the experts who knows how to navigate difficult and uncertain environments are movements, because as we said, they've been doing this for a long time. They have built up the resiliency to respond, and they actually have the solutions. And I want to give one example of something that happened last week in Kenya with the anti-rights movements and the targeting of civil society and LGBTQ movements in Kenya, and facing the backlash of that uncertain time. Now, one thing that came up for me here is how even well-intentioned approaches and responses actually put movements at risk. And so another reason to rely and to trust what movements are saying that they need as their response, and believing in that in a way that really helps uplift movement solutions, and ensuring that learning takes place alongside and actually with movement at the forefront, as a way to mitigate risk and ensure that engagement is well-intentioned and supportive of where movements are needing for us to be.
Thank you so much, Nish, for all these reflections that I really, it's a manifesto. I think we have guidelines, and everything that has been mentioned here, I really want to print it all and put it on a wall and read it all every single day to remember, that we have big grounding here, shared grounding between all of us. And I think really one of the main messages that I think it's a value, it's a principle, it's a foundation for my existence and my work. And you reiterated it in every single time each one of you shared a remark, was that really proximate communities know best. So they know best, and we should just, whether we're proximate communities or allies, really think about our role. How do we show up? And I think this is one of the trust in what they know. And that reminds me, I've always kind of operated with the ground, proximate communities or movements led by those with proximity are successful, impactful, and ethical. So this is the most innovative, strategy to do any work and any movement work, to trust the proximate communities. So thank you all for bringing all these remarks. I really want to bring in others into these conversations. Many have dialed in. What's on your mind? What this conversation brings up to you, whether questions, reflections, curiosities, please unmute yourself and jump in. Sue?
Thanks, Sana. Hi, everyone. I'm the Vice President, Strategy, Innovation, and Impact here at the Equality Fund. I wanted to add a comment. We often talk about innovation, and I come from the innovation sector before I joined the Equality Fund. And what I think is really unique about the work of our partners and this work that we're doing together at the Equality Fund is that I think a lot of us in the global north think that innovation is about new ideas. You know, what's new and shiny and new and shiny. But where we really fail to move the yardsticks on gender equality and in other sectors is implementation. There's lots of known solutions, but we, year after year, decade after decade, really fail to implement at scale. And this is really what the Equality Fund is solving for, because to implement solutions at scale requires leaders around the world that understand the unique context that they work in and know how to be a part of deep and lasting change in 100 different countries around the world and in 1,000 different communities. And so I find it really exciting to think about innovation, not just through the lens of new things, which our partners are doing, but also through the lens of how to implement ideas and opportunities in unique contexts at scale. So in that sense, we're scaling diversity in the sense that we're scaling wisdom and experience and proximity to the challenges and the networks that our partners bring to bear, and really thinking about how to solve for challenges that are unique to each individual context. So I just wanted to share that and kind of double down on some of what Jolene and Monica have been talking about. Thanks, Sana.
Thank you. And yeah, great point. It's really about the how. And with that, I'll bring Carrie Chulito.